See you guys next week.
Thank you, Megan. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see everyone. We are on lesson number 9 tonight. Lesson number 9. So grab a hold of that. Take a look at where we are. We finished up a unit last week, and so at the end of time tonight, I'm going to hand out an assignment for you all to take it. We'll review those chapters 4 through 8, and it'll be a little worksheet, a little quiz for you. You can use your workbook for it and so forth. So just know that's coming at the end of class tonight to take home. It'll be due next week. Just so you guys kind of put this in your minds, next Monday will be our last time to meet until after Christmas, because you guys start your Christmas break and things like that. So tonight, next week, will be our last time, at least for a couple weeks, and then we'll be back on starting in January, okay? All right, so let's think through a little bit of where we were last week. We talked a little bit about Joseph and his brothers. We talked about the family tree and those kind of things. So we want to make sure that we can still kind of connect the dots. So if you're looking on the page, bottom page 37, right? So bottom page 37, you see that timeline at the bottom. And that timeline kind of gives you an idea of where we are in the whole scope from the time of creation, which we're not exactly certain on the date, right? Because the Bible isn't really a history book as far as, dates are all lined up for us. That's not really the purpose of the Bible. But we do get a basic idea of the amount of time that has passed from the time that God created in 6 days all the way up to where we are today. We know that it's 2,000 years, roughly, since Jesus was here, because it's the year 2020, right? So it's 2,020 years since AD 1. And you guys know that, you should know that that was the date in which we'd say that's when Jesus entered the world. Separated BC from AD. And I know some of your books, if you guys go to a public school, even if you go to a parochial school like Trinity or Emmanuel, sometimes our science books or our history books will still talk about the dating, insignia. So you talk about BCE, you may have heard that before, and BCE is before the Common Era, and all they're doing is changing it, but the hinge is still the same. It still comes down to what changes BCE and AD or whatever. It's still the birth and the arrival of Jesus. And so those things are the key components of what we see. So, here's what I want you to think. I want you guys to just answer these out loud. We don't have to write these down. But when we talk about who God is, I want you to think about this. How do you get to know someone? And think about that. I want you just to speak out loud. We could have broken this down and done it, but we're already kind of into our time a little bit. Guys, just sound off. Tell me, how do you get to know somebody? What do you got to do? Shadow?
Asking.
Yeah, you're probably going to ask questions, right? You might got to go, hey, what's your name? Hey, what do you like to do? Hey, where do you live? Where do you go to school? What sports do you like? Hey, did you take my lunch? You want to get to know things about people. But yeah, asking questions is good. My grandfather, when I was about your age, he told me gave me these wise words once. He said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I always thought, well, duh, right? I get that. But what his point was, he said, you should listen twice as much as you talk. Right? And so asking questions really causes you to listen. Right? I'd like to know something about you so I can listen to the responses. So naturally, to get to know a person, we may ask some questions. So we get to know other people by talking with them, asking questions, and then listening. But how do you get to know God? All right, I want you to think about that, because that's a little different. Even though you can sit in here and hear my voice, and you can talk to me on the phone, you can talk to me over the internet and things like that, or your friends and things like that. Abe, give me an idea.
You can read about him in the Bible, and you can look at creation.
Yeah, those are 2 great ways, right? The Bible is God's voice. We talked a little bit about that early on in crossover as we went. And so if the Bible is not only a book about God, but it's his actual voice speaking to us, which means it's still relevant today. It's not just a story. It's actually his voice that speaks to us. Shadow?
Go to church.
Yeah, go into church, because here there's people that will help you interpret maybe what the Bible says. That's kind of one of my jobs as a pastor. You want to go, here's what the Bible is telling you, here's what it means. You guys, when you're in church, or if you watch me online, or church, or whatever, I tend to tell a lot of stories. And those stories are trying to say, here's what the Bible says, it's like this. Right? And I think that's one of the reasons Jesus told stories too. He called parables. Right? But he told these easy to understand stories, right? The lost sheep, the gate, the vine, and the wine, and the grapes, and things like that. All these ways that God would tell stories to try to make sometimes the more complicated issues more understandable. So God shows a little of who He is through His creation. Ada mentioned that. But we really get to know God when we hear or read about Him in His Word, the Bible. The narratives in this lesson tonight are going to show us some aspects of who God is. That He's powerful, He's loving, He's patient, He's almighty, and so much more. Would somebody read there under the big picture? Would somebody volunteer? Shiloh, go ahead.
Jacob moves his 11 sons and their families to Egypt to join Joseph and escape the famine in Canaan. There the sons of Israel multiply and prosper. But after 300 years, a new kingdom, Egypt, arises who doesn't remember Joseph. Pharaoh sees how many Israelites there are in the land, over 2 million by now, and he is afraid. So he decides to make them slaves. Pharaoh mistreats them. He makes a law to kill all newborn Hebrew boys. Life is hard for the Israelites. In fact, life is horrible. They cry out to God, and God answers them by raising up Moses, an Israelite who actually grew up in Pharaoh's palace. Thanks to God's special intervention. Through Moses, God tells Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh says no. After 10 plagues on the Egyptians, ending with the death of Pharaoh's firstborn, Pharaoh finally says go. God leads his people out of Egypt across the Red Sea. They are on their way to the Promised Land.
All right. So there's a real quick synopsis. We're going to break it down a little bit. Are you guys too old to have watched that movie, The Prince of Egypt? It was a cartoon, wasn't it? There was a cartoon movie.
Moses?
Yeah, it was about Moses, right? Are you guys at least familiar with it? I'm not asking if you've watched it lately. I just remember that there was a time, I don't know how long ago, that it was, I don't know if it was Pixar that did it. I don't think it was Disney. Anyhow, there was a movie, a cartoon, full-length movie called The Prince of Egypt. It was all about Moses and the Exodus and things like that. The only reason I bring that up is because I think more and more today we're visual learners, right? So if you see a picture or you watch it, it's different than just reading about it. I'm not saying that reading's bad. Reading's wonderful. But sometimes engaging more than one of your senses is a good thing. Anyhow, that was a story that I recall was out not too long ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I could be wrong, maybe it was longer than that. There's also a real-life one that's on, and it's often around. They put it on TV for some reason at Easter time, and it was done back in the 40s, I think, 1940s, a long, long time ago, called The Ten Commandments. And if you guys ever seen that, that's a real-life movie. It was the guy that plays Moses and things, and it's this same story that we're going to hear about today. So maybe you have some reference points to it. You're like, well, I think I know this story. But we're going to kind of walk through it. Now remember, if we go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, remember we call those our three patriarchs? God often introduces himself, and it's no different tonight. We're going to find that when he talks to Moses through the burning bush, and God, and Moses is talking to him, he says, "I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So that Moses would have gone, "Oh, it's him," right? The one that my ancestors would have talked to and interacted with and so forth. God often introduces himself that way because he's bringing that history with him, right? Like, for instance, before we started in class, I was talking a little bit about sports that we have done in the past. I think I was talking to Bodie, and we were talking a little bit about baseball. And I was like, well, I played baseball in college. Well, that history, as you bring it forward, that at least means maybe Pastor Glenn knows something about baseball. Maybe I wasn't any good in college, but at least there was some history that you bring toward it. If somebody says, "Have you ever been to Disney World?" and you go, "Oh, I was there 2 years ago." See, that experience brings that history with you. Like, I remember this. I know what that looks like. I know what it was like there. So God really is introducing himself in much the same way. So, in your Bibles, open up, not to Genesis this time, because we've spent some time looking at Genesis. I want you to look at the second book, and I want you to look at Exodus. So if you don't have a Bible with you, grab one off the back bench there, and open that up for me. Right? Exodus. So Genesis, Exodus. Now, so give me some gold star points here. Genesis and Exodus are two books that are part of what little section of the Bible? What do we call it? What is it? Creation would be Genesis, that's right. But if I take Genesis and Exodus and a couple more books, it's part of what little section of Scripture? What do we call it? Yeah?
Pentateuch.
The Pentateuch, right? You guys just got a point on your quiz if you remember that. Pentateuch. Pentateuch. How many books are in it? The name tells you. How many? 5. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And the same person wrote all 5 of them. Obviously it's God, but through whom? Who wrote those first 5 books? Moses, the guy we're talking about tonight. So he has some first-hand knowledge of the Exodus, but Genesis, remember, God had to tell him what happened. Right? In the beginning, God created. Moses wasn't there. He wasn't floating around in space with a little chisel and a stone tablet kind of going, spoke light, and then suddenly there was light. Okay? All right. So at the top there, let's walk through this in Exodus 1. Have it open there, Exodus chapter 1, and we're going to start with verse 8 and pick up on this. So let's read that first paragraph in your workbook, please. Top of page 38, Joseph to Moses. So we're going to try to connect the dots for us here a little bit. So let's see, Michael, would you read that first paragraph?
Jacob, his 11 sons and their families, about 70 people in all, moved from the land of Canaan to Egypt to escape the famine. The Pharaoh gave them the best land, and they lived in security and prosperity. The Israelites multiplied until they filled the land. 300 years after the death of Joseph, a new Egyptian king rose up who forgot Joseph. He grew afraid of the number of the Israelites in the land.
All right, stop there. So, you guys, if you remembered beforehand, Shiloh read that the 70 Hebrews, right? So this is all of Jacob's family. By the way, he says he only brings 11 sons. He had 12. Why did he only bring 11?
Because Joseph's gone
Joseph is where?
in Egypt.
He's in Egypt, and that's where they are. So he didn't have to bring Joseph. All right, that's my point. It's not a trick question. But he brought 11 of his sons because Joseph was already there. So recap the story, right? All brothers hated Joseph. Why? What special ability did he have?
Father's favorite.
He was father's favorite, and what else could he do? He told him something, Parker. Yeah, he had ability to determine dreams and tell the future. He said, all of you guys are going to bow down and worship me one day. And they're like, man, this guy's got some nerve. Right? And so they didn't like him. He was Dad's favorite. Now, can anybody tell me why he was Dad's favorite? Shut up.
Rebecca's son.
Yeah, remember Rebecca was the one woman that he wanted to marry? Right? And then, obviously, from Rebecca's dad, he had her marry his other daughter, who was the eldest, Leah. Right? And they kind of tricked him on his wedding night and so forth. But anyhow, so he did marry Leah, he did marry Rachel, and also the 2 servants. And then from those 4 women, I know that's different than what we practice today. We just have one man, one woman. From those 4 women, they have 12 sons. And if you remember, there was that one family tree a lesson or 2 back that talked about where they all came from. And if you remember, Jesus came from whom? Leah or Rachel? Jesus.
Leah.
It came from Leah, right? So even though we kind of go, well, Leah's the oldest, and maybe she wasn't as pretty as Rachel, and that doesn't really matter, but that's just how they describe it. Jesus actually came from Leah's line, which is pretty awesome, right? King Saul, if you guys remember King Saul, in the story Saul and David and Goliath and things like that, King Saul came from Rachel's line. Came from Rachel's line. So just to kind of see those things. So we have Jacob brings his 11 sons and their families, 70 people, into Egypt. Pharaoh loves them because Joseph was such a hero. Tell me why Joseph was such a hero in Egypt. What did he do that was so great?
He saved the Egyptians from the famine.
Yeah, remember, because again, he translated or interpreted the dream. Pharaoh had this weird dream about cows and fat cows and skinny cows and things, and they're like, I don't know what this is about, but it's very disturbing. And Joseph said, well, here's what it is. There's going to be 7 years where everything is really great. It's plenty. Okay? And then after that, there's going to be this terrible famine. 7 years is going to be really bad. And so Joseph, because God gave him that ability to interpret the dream, he says, listen, during those 7 really good years, we're going to save up. We're not going to just live easy and kind of be lazy and just go, oh, we've got so much food, so much, production and fruit and all these things. We're just going to live kind of fat, happy lives. He says, no, we're going to be good stewards of it. Take care of it, store it away. Because then the next 7 years, and you understand, you don't see a famine coming. Right? You're not like, wow, 4 years from now it's going to be really bad. The only person who believed that was Joseph. And then he convinced Pharaoh of it, and so it turned out to be the salvation not only of Egypt, but also of Israel and Canaan and all the surrounding nations. So that's why Jacob and his family came to Egypt. They're like, we're starving back home. Right? And so if we come here, would you please give us some food? We'll pay for it. We'll trade for it, whatever we need. And that's when, Joseph sees them and goes, that's my family. Right? And now what am I supposed to do? Part of me goes, I'm really mad at them, right? Because they sold me into slavery, and I spent time in prison, and I've been away from my family, and I've been outlawed and all these things from back home. And I'm angry, but I also recognize they're my family, and I love them. And you guys remember, hopefully you remember that story of what all takes place. So this is connecting the dots between Joseph and his dad Jacob and all his brothers and all the family coming and settling in Egypt, in a really good area of Egypt, one of the best places, and then leapfrog into Moses' time, where the people that are slaves in Egypt are crying out to God, going, rescue us. So somewhere along the line, it goes from living in a really nice area of Egypt to then being treated as slaves. And so tonight we're going to talk about that transition. Because sometimes we kind of wonder, well, if Moses went to Egypt to tell, the Hebrews, right, I'm here to rescue you, God sent me here, Pharaoh, let my people go, and then you're like, well, why are they in Egypt? What are they doing there? Did Egypt come and capture them and take them away? Nope. They went there on purpose, and they grew from 70 people, right, Jacob's family, all his sons, all their wives, all their kids, 70 people. After 300 years in Egypt, they're now 2 million people. From 70 to 2 million. Okay? So I want you to think of a group of people that are very different from you. Alright? So I want you to think of, let's say, Muslims. Alright? So people that, I'm not suggesting their ethnicity, but their religious practices. Right? A Muslim. They could be white, they could be Middle Eastern, they could be Asian, whatever, but they're Muslims. Right? So they practice much differently than you and I do. They believe in Allah. They don't believe in the Trinity or God or Jesus. Their churches are different. Their language they use in their worship is different. And so they move into Jeff City, and there's a group of them, and there's 70 of them. All right? And we're like, that's fine. It's America, and you can have the right to practice and worship the way you want. That's just fine. What if 300 years down the road, that group of Muslims that are different from us multiply, right? Just by natural multiplication. And suddenly we couldn't handle 2 million people in Jeff City, but let's say there's 200,000 Muslims in Jeff City. Do you realize that would probably change how we do things here? Right? They have different diets than we do, right? Where I'm a big fan of hamburgers. I love hamburgers, right? They won't eat beef. They have different guidelines to that. Now, I am not at all saying anything negative against Muslims. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But there's a group of people that are very different from us. And so there would just be this sense of, well, how do we interact? How do we talk together? How do we work together? So now jump back to this story and say, Pharaoh was really looking at it the same way. He says there's these Jews, Hebrews, same word, right? There's these Hebrews, they speak differently, they worship differently, they have different ideals, different philosophies, and they used to be just a small little group of people that, back in history, there was this guy named Joseph that saved the Egyptian people, but that was 3 centuries ago, right? Like, for instance, if you're an ancestor of George Washington, right, that's close to 300 years ago, right? 1776, back when we declared our independence and so forth as a country. You went back 300 years, and if you said, I'm an ancestor of, George Washington, I don't know that that would mean very much anymore. I mean, it's kind of cool to say it's a piece of trivia, but it's not like people, when you walk into a room, they applaud you, and they're like, woo, you're an ancestor of George Washington, right? They would just kind of look at it and go, okay, that's part of our history. The Egyptians, I think, probably thought the same way about the Hebrews. Listen, we appreciate that guy 300 years ago, Joseph, but there's been famines that have come and gone, there have been pharaohs that have come and gone, kings that have come and gone, and now these Hebrews, who are really different from us, they're just multiplying, they're everywhere. And so he says, I'm a little nervous. Now, what he's actually nervous about, we're going to talk about. So, as Pharaoh oppresses Israel here, Parker, would you read that, read up through verse 14? I'm sorry, of Exodus chapter 1, 8 through 14.
And made their lives bitter with hard.
Start with 8. Did you start with 8?
Oh.
Yeah, 8 through 14.
Now there
Yep.
arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us, and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them and afflicted them with heavy burdens.
Mm-hmm.
They built for the Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Rezin. But more were oppressed. The more they multiplied, and more they spread abroad. And the Egypts were dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made people of Israel work as slaves. And they made their lives bitter with hard service and mortality and bricks, and all kind of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
All right, so kind of describe what happened. So imagine in my scenario that I gave you that we as Americans, right, began to punish and persecute the Muslims, right, in this country. That'd be terrible, right? Now, we do have some history in our country of not treating other groups of people well, right? I pray that we have outgrown that and grown to be, more understanding, more accepting of different people. But so in Egypt, that's what they recognize. They're like, there are 2 million of these Hebrews. They don't believe like us. They don't practice like us. They don't necessarily work alongside us. In fact, when we go to war, we're afraid that maybe they'll side with our enemies, right? And then maybe attack us from within. So Pharaoh is afraid of them. He says there's just too many of them. And he says, so let's start to oppress them. Let's do things that make life hard for them. We'll take away their homes. And we'll kind of boss them around. We'll insist that they work for us, and we won't pay them, and so forth. So pretty soon, after a very short amount of time, they're slaves. And naturally, they're unhappy about being slaves. I think everybody would be unhappy when they're slaves. And so they begin to cry out to God. God, we're your people. We're the chosen people, and we're being oppressed by these Egyptians. Help us, save us. And so we can see what happens as it goes a little on. Now, so jot it down. What did Pharaoh do? Basically from what Parker read there, what did Pharaoh do from what he read? What did he do, Jason? Yeah, made them slaves. Jot it down. Jot it down there. Made them slaves, right? Now, what was the result of his action? Right? What was his result of his action? Look at verse 12, Jace. Well, that's coming. That's coming. Don't jump the gun yet. You're right, that is coming. Look at verse 12. What happened? Pharaoh oppresses the Hebrews. And what's the result, Shiloh? They multiply. Right? So even though they were oppressed and so forth, they had even more children, right? Or generations. So that 2 million grew even more. You understand, guys, with 2 million people, if every family out of 2 million had one child, right, that's hundreds of thousands of children. Just from those 2 million. I mean, if you cut that 2 million in half to say there's, 1 million men and 1 million women, and how many of them are married and can have kids and so forth, you can have 100,000 kids in one generation. I mean, this number can grow really fast. And so, naturally, Pharaoh's looking at this kind of going, this is going to be a problem for us. So he starts to treat them poorly. And God, even in the midst of their slavery, rewards them. You're going to still be fruitful. You're still going to multiply. There's going to be more Hebrews. All right? But that wasn't the worst thing Pharaoh did to the Israelites. What did he do next? Exodus 1:22. Bodie, would you read that verse? Just verse 22.
Yes. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.
Now, cast means what? What does it mean to cast something?
Throw.
Throw it, right? You cast a line and you're fishing or whatever. So every male baby that's born, you got to throw it in the Nile River, right? Now, that's not to see if they'll swim. That's to kill them, right? And so when you think about it, 2 million people, 100,000 kids every generation, split it in half, guys and girls, 50,000 male babies, right? In one generation, thrown into the river Nile to kill them, right? And what they're trying to do, and I don't mean to be crass, what they're trying to do is, with fewer males, they can't reproduce. So it takes a male and a female to have Hebrew families, right? So like we're going to eliminate the males, right? Not going to kill the men because they're slaves, they're working, right? But the babies will do away with the babies, right? This is a terrible thing, right? I mean, this is genocide, on a major scale, right? That Pharaoh is doing this just because he's afraid, right? Just because he's afraid of the Hebrews. The Hebrews haven't demonstrated, at least not historically, any threat to Pharaoh whatsoever. But he just goes, well, there's 2 million people that I don't really know all that well, and I don't trust them all that well, so we need to get rid of them. So all male children. So the reason that's being told to you, if you know the story, this actually is what gets Moses involved in the beginning. Okay? All right. So, top of the page, birth of Moses. Let's see. Jace, would you read that paragraph, please?
Moses' mother would not submit to Pharaoh's evil law to kill all Hebrew baby boys. She hid her newborn son, Moses, for 3 months. Then she made a basket, waterproofed it, put baby Moses in it, and set it in the Nile. She instructed Moses' sister to stay nearby to see what would happen. Pharaoh's daughter happened to come to the Nile to bathe that day. When she saw baby Moses, she had pity on him. She decided to break her father's law. She not only saved this Hebrew boy, but also paid Moses' mom to nurse him. Then she adopted Moses as her own son, and he grew up in the Egyptian palace.
Okay. So that's all covered in Exodus 2. We can read that, but it's so basically Moses' mom, and I imagine a lot of women in the Hebrew culture at that time didn't want their babies to die, and they probably tried really hard to hide them. But if the Egyptians, obviously, if this was a law of the Pharaoh, they obviously had people check it. Right? If you are walking around pregnant as a slave, and they would have seen the men and the women and so forth, they'd keep an eye on the pregnant women. And they're like, when you have the baby, we want to see what you have. If it's a male, we're taking it away. If it's a female, we leave it alone. Right? And that's because they want to still have slaves, but they just don't want them multiplying like they used to. Right? It's a terrible story. Okay? And so as this happens, as it keeps continuing here, we see this grow and grow and grow. I do want you to look at this, however. In your Bibles, Exodus 2, verse 1. Right? Chapter 2, verse 1. Abby, would you read that first verse for me? One line.
Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a
Levite.
Levite woman.
There you go. That's it. So, now here's the key of that. It says, a man from the house of Levi, is how we pronounce it, Why is that name important? Ada?
Because the Levites would be the line of priests.
Yeah, they're actually going to be the line of priests later, but it's one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Right? If you guys go back to page 34 in your workbook. Go back to page 34. Right? 34. You see that family tree there, that little tan box? Right? What number is Levi as far as the sons?
3.
He's number 3. He's the third son, and he's the third son of whom?
Leah.
Leah's the mom, okay? So it has Levi, and from Levi, like Ada said, the priests come from Levi. They call them Levites, okay? If you guys remember, I'm jumping around here, I know. If you guys remember the story of the Good Samaritan, you guys remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? The guy gets beat up, and he's on the side of the road, and it says a priest walks by, and then later on a Levite walks by. It's one of these guys. Right? So we tend to identify people in the Bible based on what tribe they come from. There were 12 tribes, 12 sons of Jacob. Every son was a tribe. Okay? In fact, later on, and we might show this, I don't remember if it's in your workbook or not, but when Moses takes the children of Israel, gets them out of Egypt, and they start wandering in the desert, every time they stop and set up camp, they set up the tabernacle, which is church, in the center, and then every tribe camps out together. Kind of like if you guys have ever gone camping with a group of people, your family camps in this camper, then your friends are camping in this camper over here, other friends are in this camper. Back in the time when they're walking around, there's 2 or 3 million people, and they'd have the Levites, the Benjamites, all these different families that are the tribes. And so all your tribes are all related just like your family is. Okay? And so that's kind of what they're seeing here. So the Levites here, so Moses, right, the birth of Moses, a man from the house of Levi went and took a wife who was a Levite woman in the same one, and she has a son, doesn't want him killed, and so she decides to hide him. And it's kind of interesting how God takes care of this. They put him in a basket, set him afloat in the Nile. By the way, what do you know is in the Nile? What kind of animals are in the Nile River? Do you guys know?
Crocodiles?
Yeah, big ones, right? I mean, this is one of the most dangerous animals on the planet as well as in this river. And so they're well known for this. It's not a safe place at all to have a little baby. So, obviously she puts it in a basket enough to be safe, but it's still very dangerous. I think that's one of the reasons, not to be gross, that Pharaoh probably had them throw the babies into the Nile River. They would be disposed of. That's kind of gross to think of, but obviously it wasn't so they could survive. Okay? So Moses is floating in this basket. Pharaoh's daughter just happens to be down there, right? Going to take a bath, right? That's how they clean themselves in a river. And goes in and sees this little baby in a basket. She kind of has compassion on it, takes it up, and of course then she can't nurse the child because she wasn't pregnant, didn't have a baby, right? So she has this servant, this slave, just happens to be Moses' mother, right? And so Moses' mother actually nurses her very own son. And the Pharaoh's daughter is never the wiser of it. But that way, because she's the daughter of Pharaoh, Moses grows up in the house of Pharaoh. Right? So, interesting how Joseph, back 300 years before, came all the way up to be able to be Pharaoh's right-hand man to protect everybody and save him from the famine. And here's Moses, another Hebrew, that ends up being taken right up into Pharaoh's palace again, a high place of influence there as well. All right. Mason, underneath Moses and the burning bush, would you read that paragraph there for us?
When Moses was 40, he killed an Egyptian who was abusing a fellow Hebrew. Afraid, he fled from Egypt to the land of Midian, where he became a shepherd. 40 years later, he was tending a flock when he saw a crazy sight, a bush burning, but not burning up. Then he heard a voice from the bush calling him, "Moses, Moses." Wisely, Moses answered, "Here I am." The voice introduced himself, saying, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." God told Moses that he had heard his people's cry for help, and he had seen their suffering. God told Moses he was going to deliver his people from Egypt, and Moses was going to lead them. Moses had lots of questions, including this big one. If the people say, what is his name? What shall I say to him?
Very good. So this is the beginning of the interaction. Most of us probably know the story about the burning bush. It was a miraculous occurrence. The bush didn't burn up. God did locate himself there in the bush. Didn't mean that God wasn't everywhere else at the same time. He just made his presence known in this unique way. As you guys look into Exodus, open up to Exodus 3, or turn to Exodus 3. Right? Exodus 3. And I want you to look at verses, let's see, look at verse 14. Exodus 3, verse 14. This is after Moses has asked them, I'll read 13. If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Remember when we started tonight, how do you learn things about people? And Charles said you ask questions. Here's Moses asking a question, right? I don't know if you guys answer the phone at home much anymore. I know we all have cell phones and things like that. When I was growing up, right, we had a phone that was on the wall, right? The cell phones didn't exist yet. And so when you answered the phone, I come from a big family. There's 7 people in my family. And so sometimes the phone call wasn't for me. And so I'd pick it up, and it was a phone call from my mom or dad. And I would say, who should I say is calling? That was a polite way of asking. So that I would say, Dad, it's a phone call. It's a Mr. Phillips for you. Because that's what he told me, right? So Moses is essentially doing the same thing. There's this burning bush, this voice, booming voice talking to him. He's like, when the Israelites ask me, who do you talk to that you sent me, they're going to ask the obvious question. What was his name? What was God's name? I mean, we've always talked about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but what's his name? And look what he says, verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. Now, let me tell you what that actually is. That is 4 Hebrew letters, right? And it's essentially YHWH. Does anybody know what that is? Yahweh, right? It's Yod, He, Wah, He. Those are the four letters. The Greeks would call it the tetragrammaton. Tetra means 4, grammaton is grammar, letters. And so it's the 4 letters. Now, do you guys remember what I told you about Yahweh? Is it a special word? What makes it so special?
Another name for God.
Yeah, it's God's name, right? So it's kind of like, it's not a great example, but most of the time you guys at your age, because of our culture, wouldn't call me by my first name. Right? That's just kind of outside respect and propriety and so forth. So it's usually pastor or Mr. to an adult or Mrs. Whatever. We don't usually call people by their first names if they're a fair amount older than us. That's kind of just respect, right? Now for God, imagine it's not just respect, it's reverence and it's awe. And so we can't call God Yahweh. So what we do is we change it, right? We change it to Elohim. We change it to El Shaddai. We call it, it's that God. It's the supreme one. But we can't call him Yahweh because that's his name, right? Now, do you guys remember, what does it look like in the Old Testament when they write a word instead of Yahweh? What did they put in the Bible? So as you read through the Old Testament, what word do you see instead of Yahweh, Micah? Lord. Lord in all caps. Sometimes you'll read Lord and it'll be capital L, little O-R-D. That's just Elohim. That's El Shaddai. That's, kind of we'd say God. But Yahweh is L-O-R-D, all caps. So here when it says, I am who I am, you guys should see in your Bibles, that's all caps. Because again, that's God's name. And so that's what you'll see. Let's see. Let's keep going because we're a little shy on time. Top of page 39. You guys see that blue box up there? That funny little writing that's on the second line, that's Hebrew, and that's actually the word Yahweh. Okay? So if you want, underneath that, I want you to put a little line and an arrow under that Hebrew word, but make the arrow go from right to left. Right? So underneath that Yahweh word, make it go, start at the right of it, underneath it, and go to the left. Make a little arrow. Kind of the opposite way that you would read it. Okay? Because Hebrew, if you guys remember, we talked about this the second week. Hebrew is the language of the Old Testament, and it's written backwards. Now, it's backwards to us, it's right for them. Okay? So if you guys see those 4 letters, the tetragrammaton, those 4 letters, you guys imagine that little tiny mark on the far right, little tiny ones floating in the air, that's the Y. The next one that looks kind of like a 7 with a little leg, that's an H. The next little one that kind of looks like a sloppy number 1, that's the W. And then the last letter is what letter? It's an H again. Y-H-W-H. Yahweh. Right? So you guys actually just learned some Hebrew tonight. Okay? Right? Yahweh. In your Bibles, somebody crack open in your Bible, look up Psalm 119. In your Bibles, look up Psalm 119 real quick. And I didn't look ahead to see if this is in there, but I'm gonna show you something that just about everybody, anywhere in 119 actually, it's not a particular one. Do you guys see how in 119 it's broken down kind of by sections? Psalm 119 is one of the longest, it is the longest psalm. Do you guys see any Hebrew in there? Are there any Hebrew words, letters? So what you're looking at in Psalm 119, you guys can do this at home in your own Bible. You can sit in church and show off to your mom and dad and say, hey, I know where there's some Hebrew in the Bible. Psalm 119, all the chapters almost, not chapters, sections of Psalm 119 are broken down by each of the alphabet letters of Hebrew. So if you go to the very beginning of Psalm 119, verse 1, you have the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And then there's about 8 verses, and then there's the second letter. Aleph, Bet, Gemma, all the way through. Now there's not 26 letters like there are in the English alphabet, but it's close to that. So if you went through there, you would find, for instance, Yod, Y-O-D. That would be the Y of Yahweh, right? It's one of the letters, right? So when we look at that word Yahweh in your book, it's kind of, again, from where you guys look at it, Y-H-W-H, backwards, okay? Then you would find those letters actually there in Psalm 119. So that's just trivia, but I do want you to know that sometimes you could look up there and they'll not only have the word for the letter, but they'll even have the Hebrew symbol, right? Which I think you have in there, right? Does it have a Hebrew letter in there or just the word?
Just the word.
Just the word. Some Bibles will actually have the Hebrew like the Yod or the Hi or the Waw, which you guys don't know what those are, but that's the Y-H-W-H, right? So, Psalm 119, only book of the Bible, only chapter in the Bible that has all the Hebrew letters. So now, there you go. All right. So, the name that God revealed to Moses in that blue box at the burning bush was I Am. This name has 4 letters in the Hebrew language, and there they are. It's been translated Yahweh, or we put vowels in it, because the Hebrew doesn't write vowels. They're what they call assumed. Or we call it Jehovah. So if you guys ever heard of Jehovah's Witnesses, right? That's a name they're like, it's because the name of God is precious, it's holy. This, God's Old Testament covenant name, is referred to as the Tetragrammaton. 4 letters, okay? Tetra means 4 in Greek, grammaton refers to the letters of the alphabet. All right? So when you see the word Lord all in small caps in many English Bibles, that means it's referring to Yahweh. And again, that's a tradition in the Bible to get away from saying God's actual name because it's special. It's not wrong to have that kind of reverence for God. We just don't avoid it out of fear, right? It's okay to say God's name is special. I imagine, I hope, most of you would resist using God's name in any way other than prayer, singing, worship. That we don't use His name, when we're swearing or use His name when we're surprised and so forth. That's just not a good use of His name. In fact, that's the second commandment, right? Don't misuse the name of the Lord your God. And so we still have a healthy reverence for it, but not quite maybe what the Jews today. They would not speak it except in 2 ceremonies. They have 2 rituals, the Feast of Atonement and another one. One of the things that I think, Jace, you mentioned, you talked about the plagues that were coming. So now's the time to talk about this. So, Leah, would you read that whole section for me under the plagues?
God's plan to rescue Israel involved sending 10 plagues on Egypt to punish them
and said to Moses, "Take your people, your flocks, and your herds, and go.
Keep going.
Look at the list of plagues below. How horrible it must have been to see and experience them." Pharaoh saw the results of his sins, but he hardened his heart and would not listen to God.
All right, stop there. Thank you, Leah. So down underneath you see that sarcophagus, right? That's an Egyptian sarcophagus. That's where they would bury really important people, right? Not every Egyptian would be buried in a sarcophagus. It's a really fancy coffin, right? Most of the time they were mummified inside, where we get stories of mummies and all of that kind of stuff. Anyhow, this would have been a pharaoh. You can tell by the head set and all of that. But they have them numbered 1 through 10, all the different plagues. Now Moses, after each plague, came back to Pharaoh by God's, command to say, "Now go and tell Pharaoh again, I demand you let go of the Hebrews." Now, let me step back for a second and just have you understand what's happening here. Pharaoh's not just a mean guy. He's evil, right? He's bad. But I want you to think through, why is he resisting letting the Hebrews go? Right?
So he can have his work done. If the slaves were there, he could have all of his work done.
2 million people working for very little, right? I mean, Pharaoh's got to feed them and house them. That's basically what he has to do. Doesn't have to pay them, doesn't have to protect them. If they die, I'll just get some more, right? So 2 million people, Moses comes to Pharaoh and goes, "I want you to let go of your free workforce." Somewhat free, okay? And so, Pharaoh's like, "No way." Right? I mean, I'm building cities, I'm doing all this kind of stuff, and this is great. We're having slaves, and I don't have to fight them. I'm not, it's a good thing. And he says, "Well, if you don't, there's going to be trouble." And the first one is the water turns to blood. So the Nile River and their wells and things like that turn to blood. Well, that's pretty gross, okay? But it's not enough to really change Pharaoh. Right? He's kind of like, "This is inconvenient, but no, I'm not letting go of 2 million free workers." And then so Moses says, "All right, there's going to be another one. Now there's frogs." Right? Huge numbers of frogs. Now, frogs in and of themselves, not dangerous. Okay? But gross if they're in the millions and all through town and so forth. It's fun to catch a frog once in a while, fun to play with a frog, but if you had 10,000 frogs around and things like that around your house, you'd probably go, "That's probably a little bit much." Okay? Moses comes back, "Let my people go." God says. He's like, "I'm not going to do it. These frogs are annoying. The red blood water is annoying, but no, not going to do it." Gnats, flies, death of livestock. So now you're starting to hit people where they live, right? Food that I need, a lot reliance on things around me. Then come boils. Now it gets personal, right? Now it's on your body. Before it's flies, kind of gnats, and those are annoying and so forth. But now I got boils on my skin. It's painful. There's infection, things like now it's starting to get personal, okay? And so people start to kind of go, "Hey, Pharaoh, I don't know what's going on, but fix it, right? You're the boss. You're the king. Do something about this." Then we got hail and lightning from heaven. Right? This is kind of supernatural stuff. I don't mean just hail like blocks of ice, because remember, this is Egypt. It's pretty warm there. They're actually fire, right? Hail of fire coming down and lightning. So this is supernatural, kind of destructive kind of stuff. And people kind of going, it's burning up parts of my house. It's dangerous to be outside. Hey, Pharaoh, this is bad. Got boils, got gnats, got frogs, got bloody water, and now we got fiery hail and so forth. Still no. Locusts now settle in, and they eat all of the food. Right? All the plants are getting eaten up by the locusts, which means now the animals that need to eat the grass, they can't eat. So now we've got famine. We're going to face that. Then darkness. God just simply kind of goes, "I'm not joking around." Right? The sun is going to vanish. And I don't know what that meant. I don't think it was something as simple as a solar eclipse. I think God just turned the lights out. However miraculously He did that, but it was dark. And people are kind of going, "It's supposed to be noon right now, and it's black outside." So naturally, they're scared. If you guys walked outside at lunchtime, it's sunny, and then suddenly the lights went out, you'd freak out. You'd be like, "This seems bad. Can't explain it, but it seems bad." But still, 9 plagues into this, Pharaoh's like, "No way. I'm not letting the people go." And then he says, "All right, the last one's going to be the worst." Last one is the angel of death. Right? And the angel of death has a simple job. So he's going to descend upon Egypt in the entire region, and the firstborn of every person and animal will be killed. It's not graphic, it's not gory, they just die. Right? So your eldest child will die. Your eldest animal, right? And if you're a herder and things like that, the oldest one's going to die and so forth. And so here's what happens. It starts to go down this way. Under the Passover. Connor, would you read that? That whole section under the Passover. By the way, by a show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of a Passover? Right? It's a religious observance. This is where it comes from. Sometimes we hear about it. It usually happens around Easter, okay, and so forth. But this is where it started. And so a lot of times we get a word and we're like, oh, that's the Passover. Here's what I want you to understand. This has everything to do with something passing over. That's why it's called Passover. Something is passing over. Connor, go ahead.
God sent plague after plague to warn Pharaoh to send his people food. But Pharaoh hardened his heart against God. Then God sent in the final plague. All the firstborn people and animals in the land would die. But God protected the people of Israel. He told them to kill a lamb and spread its blood around the doors of their houses. They were to cook it and eat the lamb for dinner, along with the bitter herbs and unleavened bread, dressed in traveling clothes, ready to flee Egypt. God's people listened, and the angel of death passed over their houses. But it struck the Egyptians' homes, including the Pharaoh's firstborn. A great cry rose up, and finally Pharaoh said to Moses, "Up, go out from among my people." See Exodus 12, 1-32.
Perfect. Yeah, if you want to read about that, guys, on your own time, you can. So the Passover is the angel of death. Passes over all of those that believed in what God told them. Right? God says, here's what I want you to do. Take a lamb, kill it, take the blood, put it on the side and the top part of the door, right, inside on the outside of the house. And when the angel comes by, it'll just go by your house. Everybody inside is safe. Firstborns and everybody. Okay? But Egyptians are like, I don't know who this Hebrew God is, Yahweh, I don't care. Right? And so they're like, no blood, no lamb, no nothing. And so when the angel of death comes by, firstborn in the house, all right, dies. And as you can imagine, in Egypt, several million people, right? How many firstborn are in there? Lots. Okay? So a lot of people die just like that. And then obviously Moses goes, this is a plague. This is from God. Because you wouldn't let my people go. Right? And so that's where it comes from. So when people celebrate the Passover, they are celebrating that event that happened back in Moses' time. Right? So it's something, 3,500 years ago. So when Jews, and that's usually who it is, we can celebrate it too. Because that's our history too as believers in God. Okay? But we celebrate the Passover by going, that's the time that God rescued his people in a miraculous way. Let me finish it up with this. The Exodus and crossing of the Red Sea, very familiar story. Moses led God's people out of Egypt. The angel of death, a huge pillar of fire, pillar of cloud guided them. But Pharaoh changed his mind again. He went after the Israelites. So he let them go after the 10th plague. And then afterwards he goes, I just lost 2 million slaves and I can't build this stuff by myself. So I'm going to go get them. The people were terrified. But Moses told them not to fear, that they would see the salvation of the Lord, that God would fight for them. The people came to the Red Sea. They were trapped. Or so they thought. God told Moses, stretch his staff over the waters. The water divided and the people went across on dry land. Then the Egyptians started coming across too. But God said, Moses, stretch out his staff again, and the waters closed over the Egyptians, drowning them all, and God had saved them. So I want you to think of a couple of things, and then I'll wrap it up tonight. The salvation of the people. The salvation of the people in town, in Egypt, and so forth, that were saved because a lamb was slain and his blood, its blood, saved them. Where's the connection? What does that sound like? A lamb whose blood is shed and people are saved.
Jesus dying on the cross.
Jesus, right? He's talked about as the Lamb of God. He gives his blood. His blood saves us from death. Now the death that we talk about is hell, right? And so that Passover actually is a celebration of one day when Christ will come and deliver us from death as well. All right, that's as far as we're going to make it for tonight. I do have your worksheets here. For those of you watching online, you guys are going to find that online by the video. Shiloh, would you take one of these? Hand one to everybody, please. Guys, take that and stick it in your workbook. This is due next week. You can use your workbook, obviously. Everything you need is in there. But please put it there. Do me a favor, put your name on it, just so that you, if you happen to lose track of it, it's got something. Okay, I don't think you guys should have any questions about this, but you can catch me on Sunday. You can shoot me a note, email, if you'd like. But bring this back with you next week. All right? Okay, once you have your quiz, you guys are free to go. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you, dear.